Okay, so we are going to work on painting our pumpkins today with watercolor paint, which is different than the large trays that we usually use. Those are tempera paints, which are a bit thicker. And because those are not liquid, but they're dried tempera cakes, they act similar to watercolor because you have to add water to them, but not really the same once you apply them. They don't look the same. So watercolor can come in liquid or dry as well. And this is an example of a watercolor tray that you may have seen before. And we're going to start actually with learning how to clean these out. So you can look at this and see that some student splattered the paint around, or it got dripped on, and now the yellow is not ready to be used. It's gonna turn more black or brown when we use that. So to clean them, you want to get a clean wet brush. Remember that watercolor brushes are a lot softer than the brushes we use with tempera cakes, so you have to be really easy with them. If you scrub, they are just going to tear apart, and that will make them very hard to get nice clean lines with. So all I've done here is added some clean water, and I'm going to do that to all of the ones that I see that look kind of dirty. But I have to remember to wash my brush before I go to a new color, which you guys already know. This one I think it was green, but we don't really need green for this project, so I didn't refill your green. Okay, so don't worry about that. The main colors that we're worrying with right now are red, orange, yellow, and brown, and this brown is brand new, so it's looking good. But I'll go ahead and clean the green out a little bit. Okay, so now you see that there still is that kind of dirty water lingering there at the top. So to get that out, we are going to take our brush, clean it, and then gently squeeze with your paper towel. I'm not pulling. Pulling will mess up the hairs of the brush. So all I'm doing is squeezing to soak up some of that water, because once I do that, I can soak up that dirty water. And then every time I'm going to do that same process until I get rid of that. Okay, there we go. So the yellow is clean and ready to use. And I'm just going to soak up what I have left from the orange. And now everything looks good, ready to go. So if you get your watercolor tray and any of the colors that you are going to be using need to be cleaned out, please do that first, because it will ruin your color if you have black or brown or other colors mixed in. So, okay. So we have a few methods that we're going to be learning for using watercolor. And although I am putting my tray on my paper, I don't want you guys to do that because it will mess up our background. I'm just doing that to save space and so you can see the palette as I'm working. So here's another one also that's more complete. So I'm showing you that because I want you to recognize that they don't all have to look the same. Pumpkins are all different. Some have a more red-orange color to them. Some are a bright orange. Some are a little more yellow. So what I'm going to be doing is, as I explore the watercolor methods, I'm also going to try to use my yellow to show the highlights where the light might be shining on my pumpkin. And I'll use my brown to kind of help create a little shadow and shading where the lines dip in, because you know this part of our pumpkin is actually curving out and this part would be more tucked in or recessed. Okay, so as you're working, you got to kind of think about that. So the first method that I want you guys to know is wet on dry. And that means that we are just taking wet paint and putting it on dry paper. So it's very easy to understand. And I'm going to do wet on dry with my brown because that will allow me to keep the brown in the lines where I have, I should have shading. So this is where my pumpkin is kind of more recessed and it would be a little shaded. And notice that that paint is staying right where I placed it. And that is because the paper is dry. So if I wanted to make it look a little shaded here, I could come in with my brown and add a little color. And it only moves where I move it, okay? And that's because the paper is dry. Remember, to get a darker brown, you would use less water. So you can see how this is darker than over here, and that's because I didn't go back and get more water. I just went back to get more paint. So you can control the lightness and darkness that way. And I'm just gonna come in and kind of darken up where those parts would be going into the pumpkin, because that would be a little more shaded. And the same thing is true up here. Because that dips in, I'm going to assume, I don't have my picture in front of me right now, so I'm going to make that a little bit darker too. And that's going to help give me more of a three-dimensional quality. Okay, so this again is wet on dry. Okay, now I'm going to show you wet on wet. So with wet on wet, what you're doing is adding a little bit of water to the area before you begin. And that will cause your paint to spread a little more easily. Okay, so I just put water in this one section. Don't put water all over it because it's easy to lose control if you do that. So now I'm going to get a clean brush. I'm going to start with orange because we know that's kind of our base color. And I'm just gently rubbing in that paint. Do not dig. You don't have to do that. You're not going to see a lot on your brush with watercolor. That's okay. But when we place that onto our paper, notice how it spreads because the paper is already wet. And that's a great way to get texture. You just have to be careful because it will spread out so much more than what we are used to when we have a dry paper. Okay, so I'm just gently spreading that around, and I'm keeping some areas a lot thinner because I know I'm going to try to add some highlights there with my yellow. Okay, so I'm going to leave that. Now I noticed that when I painted this part, I have more red in here. So I'm going to take my brush and go back and get a little bit of red so that that can kind of blend a little better with what's beside it. And remember, anytime you feel like maybe you got a little too dark, you can always use your paper towel. Just place it in there and it can soak up any puddles that you have. You don't want to just smack it down on your paper because it's going to spread the paint. Then you don't have as much control over where it goes. So I'm just kind of using the tip to soak that up. Okay. You guys will also have a thin brush, a thinner brush if you need it. Now I'm going to take my yellow and come in here and add it a little bit of a highlight there. And this is just a time where you're going to be kind of looking at it and playing a bit with the color. Sorry for the shadow on here. See if I can fix that. To get something that looks natural to you. Okay, so all of this would be considered wet on wet because my paper is already wet. And I feel like I've got some puddles forming, and I've got this starting to go over there, so I'm just going to get my paper towel. Now that gives you a good understanding of the difference between wet on wet and wet on dry. You are better able to control the paint when you are using wet on dry paper, but you get a much gentler, easier sort of blending where it kind of spreads in a little more when you are using wet on wet. Okay. Now, I want to show you something else. With the paint wet, as it is now, one cool thing that we can do is put salt on it, and the salt will absorb the paint just like my paper towel does, except that it will leave these little sort of crystal shapes behind, and it's a pretty cool effect. It gives a lot of texture, makes it look kind of frosty. So it's up to you if you like that effect or not, but I just want to show you what that looks like. You guys will each have a small cup of salt at your table, and you have to put the salt on when the paint is wet. And you don't want to, like right now I'm doing this in a section that's wet where all the others are still dry. So if you're going to do that, you have to be careful that you're only getting the salt in those areas. You don't want to get salt over here when you haven't painted over there yet. Okay, so I'm just gonna let that sit while I finish painting, and I'm going to speed up the video for you so you don't have to miss any more class time. And then you guys are gonna come back and do this as well. Just keep in mind that it is totally okay if you let things dry a bit and then come back and rework them. This paper is nice and thick, and it shouldn't give you too much trouble with getting thin, you know, getting too thin. I do notice that I have some little spots of paint, but that's okay. All right, so here we go, speeding up. Okay, now to go back and take a look at it, I've got everything pretty well covered, but I'm just coming back over it and thinking, okay, if I have any white spots like that, I can take my thin brush and kind of spread it out a bit. And that helps. I'm not scrubbing with this brush now. You guys know that will ruin the brush. So I'm just trying to be gentle, but I am kind of going back over it. And don't forget that when you do have puddles like this, you can use the paper towel like I said earlier, but you can also do the same thing that we do to clean out the tray, and that is to take a clean brush, dry it by squeezing the paper towel on it. You can see that it's really dry here now, and then go in and collect that paint like that, and that will make it go away. You just will want to kind of blend it so you don't end up with a little brush shape right there. This is also a good way to make your highlights kind of stand out. Up here I was starting to have a little trouble with my highlight kind of going away, but when you take this wet brush, when you take this clean brush that you've kind of dried out, you can come back and remove paint like that. And it's not going to completely remove it, but it will help it to look a little lighter and brighter like that. So that is another thing you can always come back and do if you feel like things got a little too dark or you lost some of your spots where you wanted highlights. Okay, so after you've done everything, you just kind of want to look it over and see if there are any places you want to work on, touch up. We're still waiting for this to dry. You won't really get to see the salt effect until everything is completely dry. So keep that in mind. I'm going to just add a little here and a little up here. I kind of like for it to be where my highlights are. Okay, and then that's it. I do want you to notice how I kept the back side darker to give it more of a 3D effect. I could come back in and add a little green in my stem if I wanted to, because you do tend to see that. So I could kind of put a little green down here. You see that sometimes on the pumpkins. Okay, so basically that is it. And remember, when you take this to the drying rack, you have got to hold it flat. If you tilt it at all this paint will go running everywhere. So make sure that you hold it nice and flat and then come back and clean up. Our trays need to stay kind of clean. If you notice that you mixed up any colors, go back through that cleaning process. All right, great job, thanks.